I want to turn your attention this evening to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7. Seems like we've used Matthew a good bit, at least in a recent message, but in fact, it's the Sermon on the Mount we were using different times. But for this evening, just one verse, Matthew chapter 7 and verse number 12. Matthew chapter 7 and verse number 12. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. I want to use the little phrase there, at least my adaptation of that phrase, do even so. Do even so. Tonight we're kind of looking here at a rule that Jesus gave, and it's obviously because he said it, and not me, not our church, not a larger organization. This is Jesus here. And because he said this, it's not just a suggestion. It's not just something that you might say it's a guideline that we should just aim for. That's not it. This is what Jesus said we are supposed to live like. And he said, do even so. Do ye even so. That's not always easy. Sometimes it's a challenge to live that way, but this is how a Christian must live in order to please God. He wants us not just to live for his glory and just so that he is pleased, but part of him being pleased is that we treat others like ourselves. Do even so to them. Obviously, yeah, that helps a Christian to be friends with those around him. That's for sure. But it's much more than that. It's about how we're going to show Christ in our lives, how we can show that we are filled with the Holy Spirit. Some of you may remember the name Cyrus McCormick. He was the man that really changed the way the world farmed because he was able to come up with the horse-drawn reaper and obviously kind of got away from just the scythe and sickle. It's not like you don't use those at all, maybe, in some cases or in some places. But because of his horse-drawn reaper, it stopped a lot of the back-breaking part of harvesting. And of course, too, it helped to avoid crops that were destroyed because they couldn't get to them in time before rain or various other things. But one thing that you may not have necessarily known is that Cy was a Christian. And in the process of all that, God really blessed him for his invention. And of course, he had a patent on it and things. But he purposed to run his business by the golden rule, which is what we sometimes call this verse. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the way he lived his life and ran his business. And so his business practices made it possible for men who maybe otherwise would have been poor and unable to even buy one of his inventions. He made it possible for them to do so. Several that I'll just mention to you quickly that in his day at least, he was the first American businessman to really run things this way, from what I understand. So this was sort of groundbreaking. And yet it was also Christ honoring. And let me just give you a few of those. He had an installment plan for purchase. Again, for those farmers that were poor and not able to just go out and buy one, he had an installment plan, would allow them to pay it on time. And then he also had a set price. In those days, apparently it was very common to sort of haggle and the prices may change and things like that. But he just had a set price. This is what it's going to be. And then he also had a trial period. You could have it for a little while and test it out and see if this is what you really want. Again, probably groundbreaking in many ways in those days, although we may be more familiar with that now. Maybe largely because of Cyrus McCormick. And then he also had maybe one of the first of its kind, but sort of just written right out in very plain terms, a written warranty that would say what this was going to, what he would repair or whatever. I don't know all the details there, but he had written that out or had it readily available for his customers. Now, again, some of those things may not seem very strange to us today, but in those days, this was very new. This is a new policy. And why was it? Because Cyrus McCormick believed in the golden rule right here. Treat other people like you'd want to be treated. And so he ran his business that way. And of course, again, God blessed him, and he did very, very well. Was able to support missions and various things, prominent Christian organizations. But as we apply this rule now for ourselves, we may not be in Cyrus McCormick's case, but as we apply it for ourselves, the first thing we need to notice is the context here. Because the verse actually begins with the word therefore. And when you see that word, you need to go back beforehand and see, why is that here? What's the meaning? Where's it pointing back to? And so, of course, one key reason here is found in the first part of this chapter. We could touch on a couple of different things. There's two major themes that have come through in the first few verses before we get to verse 12. The first one is, judge not that you be not judged. Be careful that you recognize the measure that you judge others by is the measure that you'll be judged by. And then he goes on and he says, maybe we would even say the therefore may say, if we are going to have our prayers answered, if we're going to be able to ask and receive, we're going to be able to seek and find, knock and it will be opened, then we need to also make sure that we are treating other people as we would want to be treated. And so there may be a couple of aspects there that we would recognize that's why he gave this. That's why this verse is fit in here where it is. So for this evening, I want us to kind of focus on a few practical applications of this golden rule. How does this apply to us? We may not be in Cyrus McCormick's condition. We may not be exactly in the condition of the hearers here when Jesus taught this, but we have our own application of it as well. And so let me just quickly give you this thought. When this golden rule kind of takes root in our heart, what will it look like? How am I supposed to live? What difference does it make? Well, I'm just going to give you some very, very simple ones tonight, but I want you to think about this a little bit. First of all, we need to be fair. Be fair. There's a couple of aspects of that. We're going to get to that. But as I mentioned here, Jesus began this teaching with a focus on judging others. How do you deal with other people? Maybe just looking on the surface, you think you know the situation, but you may not know what's going on. And you don't know all the different inner workings that have happened. It may be easy to cast judgment on other people, but sometimes we have issues of our own. And really this evening, I want us to all recognize that when you want to point finger at somebody else and say, you're not being faithful, or you're not doing this, or you weren't very kind, or whatever, what about us? We need to be pointing back to ourselves. We need to evaluate ourselves. But that's hard to do sometimes. It's easy to point fingers at other people. It's harder for us to deal with our own failure or weakness. It's not very fair for us to hold other people to sort of an accounting that smells of hypocrisy. And if they could point right back at us and say, well, that's fine. You can say that about me, but what about that? What about your situation? What about what you're doing? And Jesus warns us that we must do to others as we would want to have done to us. Would you want somebody to jump down your throat for a misunderstanding? Would you want somebody to try to call you an account for something that they don't understand? Then don't do it to others. If we're going to be following the golden rule, if we're going to do to others as we'd have them do unto us, we need to be fair. But that can also even apply to expectations of others. Not just in the judging aspect, but maybe we could apply our expectations to all sorts of things. And maybe we would just think about it, maybe even in our families. Are we fair in what we expect from them? Are we fair in our standards for them? Maybe we could ask the question, would we want to be held to the same accounting that it seemed like my child struggles with, or my spouse struggles with, or whatever it may be? Is that what we'd be happy with? Peter actually even indicated in his epistle that we men can have our prayers hindered if we don't treat our wives right. But how many children have also been hindered when their parents have undue pressure on them, unreasonable expectations? You're expected to live perfectly maybe in certain areas. Obviously, that's part of training. That's part of being a parent. We need to train them to be right and wholesome and good. But we also sometimes, if we give unfair expectations, or maybe we're not consistent, we expect that of them, but we'll do something similar ourselves. Sometimes our children may see through that. And if we're going to do to others, that includes our children, we need to do as you, or as we would appreciate. Be fair. Secondly, be kind. Be kind. This may kind of seem to border on the previous one in the area of being fair, but if we're going to treat others as we'd like to be treated, it's going to involve kindness when things are difficult. When it's not very easy to really live like we should, or to treat people like we ought to. Now let's just sort of be honest here this evening. Just kind of look at a few examples. Obviously we've been through some tough times. And there's a variety of ways we could even apply this particular one, but maybe it's even with mask mandates or various other things that go on. Maybe it's company policy, various things. Let me ask you a question. Do you take out your frustration on the cashier who can't help what store policy is? They can't help what the company policy is. So we take it out on them. We're unkind. We're harsh with them. We tell them a piece of our mind. It's not up to them. In many cases, it may not be. And so are we kind? Is that the way we would want to be treated? At least I wouldn't. I'll put it that way. I wouldn't. And yet, if I'm not careful, I can respond to them out of frustration. Maybe another one we could ask is, do you tell someone else about the gossip you heard concerning an acquaintance? Would you want that told about you? Well, then be kind. Be kind. Do you withhold help from someone because you disagree with them on some things? That can hit pretty close to home sometimes. Are you unwilling to get involved? You're unwilling to help, unwilling to do something to be a blessing because, well, we don't see eye to eye on that issue, or I don't agree with that particular part of their life. Maybe another one. Do you gripe and complain about your inconveniences or pet peeves? Would you want to be hearing about it from everybody else? Would you like for them to be sharing all of their frustrations and upset over this and that problem? The point is that whether things go well for us or not, we probably wouldn't always want to be on the receiving end of what we dish out. Some of those reactions would not be welcome. And really, if we're going to do to others as we would have them do unto us, we need to be kind. In spite of disappointment, in spite of frustration, my nerves are bad, or whatever else you want to say, we need to be kind. So number one, we need to, if we're going to treat others like Jesus would want us to treat them, and as we would want them to treat us, then we need to be fair, and we need to be kind. One more that I'm just going to mention to you quickly is that we also need to be true. We need to be true. Maybe we could kind of deal with this as the problem of fair weather friends. No one appreciates a person who's nice to your face and then behind your back, they have a different story, a different tune. Things don't quite go right. Maybe they're a little vicious even. Nobody likes to lose friends over false rumors that for some reason are believed. If we're going to treat others like we want to be treated, we need to be loyal when the tough times come. That may not always be easy. And we may even sometimes think, well, I'm more discerning than that. But how would we want to be treated? That's the question for us this evening. It's not a question of how much I see through this or that. It's how would I want to be treated? Of course, another part of this truth also is that others need to see us as consistent. Maybe they need a rock. They need somebody who's going to stand firm and this is what we believe and this is where we stand. Or this is how I am and this is what we do. And they can always count on you. We have to teach and live consistency. They need to see that we are true. If you want somebody to be true to you, if you want somebody that you can count on, make sure you are one of those people to someone else. Maybe we've all known somebody who's failed us. But let's be sure we're not that person for somebody else who's watching us. Let's make sure that we are really doing what we say we believe and what we are going to do. Let's be sure that we are consistent. You might not think of that usually in the area of doing unto others, but people want consistency. You want it from others, and others want it from you. And so we've got to be true. And so this evening, we're just going to bring it to a close. Are you treating others as you expect to be treated? How fair are you? How kind? How true? I know it may not be easy when you try to treat others kindly and they don't really return it. They don't appreciate it. They don't understand what it took for you to offer that. But in every time, all times, whatever the circumstances may be, we need to be letting the golden rule govern our lives. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. In other words, this is the whole fulfilling of what God has taught us through the Ten Commandments and the prophets, the various parts of the Old Testament. We could maybe sort of sum it up that way. This is what God has been teaching us. We need to treat others as we would want to be treated.